So up next, we have the founder and CEO of FemPeak, Somi Arian, and she will be speaking on understanding AI's impact in society. And this topic will be moderated by Aurelia Liandi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Somi Arian. I'm the founder of FemPeak, and I'm also a tech philosopher. I often had difficulty explaining to people what I did. You know, they asked me, what do you do exactly? And I was like, I'm a tech philosopher, so I'm going to explain to you what that is today. I also say I'm a tech philosopher and a transition architect. So essentially, as humans, we are entering a new age of evolution, you know, a new phase of human evolution, where we are merging with technology. And when I say when we are merging with technology, I mean mostly, you know, in terms of artificial intelligence. So we are already using AI to extend our abilities. You know, when you think about what technology is a set of tools and techniques that enhance our abilities. Since the dawn of history, we've always been using different kinds of technologies to extend our abilities. For example, when we created fire, that enabled us to then enhance our cognitive abilities because of the way that we were able to pre-digest food by cooking it, right? So now that technology has brought us to a point that we are essentially entering a whole new era of human evolution. And the way I compare it, you know, how important this AI is, it's really about is there anything you wanted to say, moderator?
No, you have the floor, Somi. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Yes, so I'm going to share my screen in a second. So I wanted to give a little bit of a background and why we are having this conversation, because it's really about taking a step back and thinking in terms of first principles. Because, you know, a lot of times what happens is that in the tech industry, people who are in deep tech often, you know, get so bogged down in the things that they're doing and in the things that they're creating that they sometimes forget about taking a step back and thinking in terms of first principles. So I'm going to share my screen now and share a presentation with you guys. Okay, put that here. Okay, so taking a step back, thinking about what, you know, how disruption and innovation are so interconnected. Essentially, since the beginning of ever since we created technologies, we've been going through cycles of innovation and disruption. So why do we innovate? We have to think about, why do we innovate as humans? We innovate because human creativity leads to new inventions, and then those new inventions make things more efficient. And then as things become more efficient, they displace some humans, right? So they displace some people from the kind of jobs that they had, or the roles that they had in the society. So then we go through this new cycle, and constantly we are creating new roles, then disruption, then innovation, and we go through this cycle over and over. Now, disruption has always happened, but it has never been this widespread, and it has never been this fast. And that is where your role as innovators and as people who are creating technologies within deep tech comes into play, because you have to think about, how do you keep a balance between, you know, continuing with your innovation, and yet thinking about the social and economic impact of these technologies. For example, we know that artificial intelligence is going to displace so many humans, right? So many people are going to be left out of the work landscape, the career landscape, because so many jobs that are available right now, they will not be necessarily available when these machine learning algorithms are able to replace them, essentially, right? So we have to think about the impact that these technologies that we are creating is going to have. So when you think about the year 2000, beginning of the 21st century, we all celebrated it, right? Like, no matter what kind of jobs you had, what kind of role you had in society, we all celebrated the beginning of the 21st century. But many of us didn't know that these technologies were, the technologies of this century were going to displace us, right? So I always look at it in like, I created this little image of, it looks like Pac-Man, right? But actually this is not Pac-Man. It's essentially this character. It's basically a character that is, you can call it automation, right? And it's the combination of automation and cheap overseas labor that is replacing and displacing so many jobs. So it's eating all of our tasks. It's not necessarily eating away the job itself, but eating all of the tasks. And then as we create new tasks, so we go as humans, we keep going up one level, and then automation and artificial intelligence, essentially learns that, and then it takes that away, and then we end up with basically less and less opportunities. So we need to, as we create these new technologies, we need to be able to keep a balance between the speed of technology and being able to manage the social impact of it. So let's ask ourselves, it's worth asking ourselves, if we wanted to understand, if we wanted to have some kind of a level of prediction of what kind of jobs, what kind of tasks will be automated, is there something that we can do to enable us to make that prediction, to then be able to prepare the society for it? So essentially, for those of you who are in deep tech, which I believe that most of the people here are, any kind of task that can be defined in terms of if this, then that, will be automated, right? So now, of course, there are layers and layers of complexity to this, and there are, it's not always that easily obvious, but actually, when you think about it, when you think deeply enough about it, most things can be ultimately defined in terms of if this, then that, most of the tasks that we do. And I'm always fascinated by and completely surprised by the level of, for example, when you think of something like predictive text in emails and when you are sending a text message, etc., how accurate it is and how much better it's becoming every time, right? So there's one other telltale sign of things that can be automated away, and those are things that require less empathy, right? Like things that are that don't need as much being able to put yourself in place of the other person, in the shoes of the other person. So that kind of level of understanding of how the other person can feel. However, even that, even with that, there's a very good chance that ultimately robots and artificial intelligence will be able to learn that, because ultimately it's not necessarily about the robots being able to feel what we feel, but as long as they can understand how we would respond to something, and then they find the appropriate response and provide that response, then that may be enough to replace us, right? So for example, if you think about something, a role in the short run, a role like a nurse would be much harder to replace with artificial intelligence, whereas the role of for example, surgeon is much more easily replaceable, because it's really about precision. It doesn't require that empathy. But over time, it's feasible that also, even if the robot or the AI doesn't necessarily feel it, as long as it can predict what kind of answer it has to provide to humans, that's also something that is possible to disrupt as well. So when we look at something like this, I created this little thing here to just sort of to give us an idea of what happens to the future of work and the types of things that humans can do versus robots can do. And it looks something like this, so it can be quite daunting when you think about it, because it will just eat away at most things, and then in the end you're left with like a group of people who are the most creative people, and of course have the technology to be able to be like the type of people that in society are creating value, right? So this is a problem, and it's a big problem that as we create these technologies, we need to think about. So because when we first started to create these machines, initially it was like we were programming the machines, right? And so you can call it a good old-fashioned AI, right? And then we started to converge. So humans and machines started to converge. And now we are getting to a point that machines are taking off and actually leaving us behind. So and that's happening so fast. So our job as people who are in the technology space is to really think about the impact of these things. For the rest of today, I know that you will be going through so many other conversations and talks that are potentially going to be a lot more technical. But I think it's very appropriate to start with the first principles and think about the impact of these technologies that we are creating, right? So what can we do about this? So the truth is that we are going through a phase of accelerated transition. It's a constant transition from one thing to another in the way that these technologies are developing. So for example, we need to be able to reimagine time, the value of time. We need to be able to think in terms of transition architecture. What do I mean by transition architecture? Think about something like if in the past our identities in the digital space or our identities in reality, if our identities were more like a house, right? So you would have strong foundations for your identity. Now in the future, and as we go through this age of the metaverse and living more and more online, our identities are becoming more like a tent rather than a house, right? So it means that we have to constantly be ready for and have the ability to constantly pack up those tents and go from one place to another, right? So this requires us to create a new form of architecture, and I don't mean like a physical architecture, but like the architecture of our human identity and the way that we are building these new spaces for for us to live in and be able to actually function in, right? So it requires a new form of architecture that is ready to be constantly in transition. And then, of course, there's the human-machine relation. Relations. How do we how do we react to? How do we relate to these machines that we are creating? And of course, we've got a pretty short presentation today. There's not a lot of time to go into things like uncanny valley and things like that. But if there are some questions in the end, we can look at those. And then so now, what do we do? So let's think about, okay, we need to reimagine time. We need to think about transition architecture and human-machine relations. So how do we approach that? Essentially, there are 4 human skills that I actually talked about in my book, which is about the future of work. And these 4 skills, I call them human skills. These human skills are things that we need to develop more than ever in this age of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And these are critical thinking, emotional intelligence, contextual creativity, and mindfulness. So I'm going to very quickly touch upon all of these and kind of give some further ideas of what I mean by them. So critical thinking, what we mean by that is our ability to understand probability, right? To get a really good understanding of and feel for probability. And actually, you'll be surprised that actually human beings are not very good at this, because really at the core of it, it's about statistics, and it's about developing an intuition for statistics. And most of the time that doesn't come to us naturally. So especially as we interact with machines and artificial intelligence more and more, the possibility of these machines being able to create an effect which we call anchoring, which means that they affect the way that we think about, and react to different things, is going to be impacted more and more. You can think about it something like, a good example of it is like how for example, our thinking is being shaped on social media like TikTok and things like Instagram Reels and things like that, because these are developed by machine learning algorithms that are affecting the way that we interact with probability and or understand probability and anchor our thinking. So to give you an example of that, think about something like if you are watching reels, right, that are constantly pushing your thinking in terms of a specific direction. Let's say something very big is happening in the world, say the Ukraine war is happening, but these machine learning algorithms, they are affecting the way that you're thinking, is like that you are completely left out of, like you're completely driven away from the reality and the things that are happening in the world, right? And instead you would be thinking about something completely inconsequential. So these are the ways that we need to use our critical thinking to think about, okay, how am I being impacted by these technologies? How am I being impacted by these AI algorithms, right? And take a step back and think, am I being programmed essentially with these machine learning algorithms? And now I don't necessarily mean that somebody is sitting there programming you. It's just that these machine learning algorithms, they keep learning and learning, right? And they are impacting our thinking and our future in a way that we are not necessarily even always aware of. So as people who are in deep tech and developing these technologies, you need to be thinking about, how is this technology that you're developing, how is it going to impact the future of humanity and the kind of legacy that you want to be leaving behind. So the other thing about critical thinking is about having the ability to prioritize and being able to have that healthy skepticism. And these are kind of muscles that we need to develop and we need to enhance and make sure that we strengthen them. And the more we rely on social media, social media, and not necessarily just social media, but actually the algorithm, the more we rely on the algorithms, the machine learning that is affecting these muscles in us, basically we are those muscles atrophy and we are less and less able to react to them based on our critical thinking. Another thing is contextual creativity. So what do we mean by contextual creativity? Contextual creativity is different from, let's say, artistic creativity. Contextual creativity is about being able to see the big picture and being able to connect the dots and being able to find new solutions and invent new paths. So I always give the example of something like, the iPod, right? Like when Steve Jobs thought of creating iPod, that's a really amazing example of contextual creativity. These are the kind of things that, like, the deep problem solving that actually we can collaborate with and combine our thinking with artificial intelligence to actually create more of that. But also sometimes it's worth being able to step outside of it and think differently. And not always rely on it. So the other thing is emotional intelligence, which is really about understanding how you feel, how others feel, and how you can help, right? So having that kind of compassionate way of thinking about our fellow humans and thinking and all other living beings and our planet, and being able to really step outside of technology sometimes and just like really have that deep connection with the world outside. And then finally, I talk about mindfulness. And mindfulness, really, I don't mean by mindfulness that you sit there and meditate for 20 minutes a day. What I mean by it is that having that kind of deliberate attention and awareness and being able to be open and receptive and inquisitive, and not necessarily have that kind of constant comparing and judgment, right? Being able to step outside of all that. The best way that I always talk about and explain mindfulness for me is really about being present in the moment and being present and connected, right? Have that kind of feeling of being an active participant and not a passive observer, not necessarily putting yourself in a position where you're driven by technology, but you are driving technology, or you are co-evolving with technology. So there's a little exercise that I usually do whenever I want to kind of like practice my mindfulness muscle. You can look at this little exercise. This is just one example of the kind of exercises that you can do to practically actually develop that, right? So when you look at this, if I tell you, just tell me the colors, don't tell me the words, right? So it's very, very hard to do it actually, right? When you look at you keep wanting to say blue, but really you should be able to say yellow, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, so that's one of the ways that you can, this is a practical way that you can practice. Okay, so that's it.
Thank you so much, Somi. Honestly, very impressive presentation. And I have one or two questions for you from some of our audience members. The first one is really, I think, a question that I do ask myself as well, is can artificial intelligence actually steal our jobs eventually? And because statistically, it's said that over the past 4 or 5 years, AI specialist positions hiring has increased by almost 74%. And people like myself or the general public, I think, would then ask themselves, does this mean we're eventually losing our jobs to robots, or?
Yes, that's the simple answer. The robots will be able to do everything better than us. Even if you're like, even if we are reduced to just sitting home and playing games in the metaverse, there will be robots that will be doing that better than us. So we really have to think about these technologies that we are developing. And I love technology, and I'm all up for it. I think that we are morphing into a new species, but I think it's important that we understand. That's why I said about not being a passive observer, but being an active participant. I believe that what's happening to us is as important as when we went from reptiles to mammals. Now we are going from mammals to something else. And with this something else, we don't yet know what it is. We are already no longer Homo sapiens.
Exactly. No, and obviously on one side, we're very excited about all these new technologies coming.
Hi, Somi. How are you?
Good. Not sure what happened there.
Technical difficulties there. But yes, thank you so much for being part of this event with us, and we wish you all of the best.